Charlene Polite Corley, joining you from the team behind the Nielsen Diverse Intelligence Series. We're gathered for another fun edition of Nielsen Noodles and covering one of our favorite topics for audiences and the media industry, sports. Sports enthusiasts continue to grow, and fans are celebrating household names like tennis star Naomi Osaka, Olympic medalist Suni Lee, and of course, LA Dodgers phenom Shohei Showtime Ohtani. As sports representation increases with AANHPI athletes and leaders, we've seen AANHPI audiences spend more time tuning into live sports events, sports podcasts, and the advertising and sponsorships shared across sports channels. So with increased viewership comes an opportunity to engage more with this community. So let's talk about what the media industry needs to know. Today we have the founder of Amazing HQ, Pranav Iyer, and racing driver for BMW Motorsport, Samantha Tan. Thanks so much for joining us, and let's get into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's start with you, Samantha.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Tan. I'm 27 years old, and I'm a Chinese Canadian race car driver, team owner, and BMW Motorsport Global Ambassador. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, but I moved to California to pursue both racing and academics and graduated with a degree in economics at UC Irvine. I began racing at 16 years old, and in 2017, I founded my racing team, Samantha Tan Racing, alongside my father, which quickly became a championship winning force. For example, in 2021 alone, we won 6 championship titles, and I became the first Asian woman to win a major international endurance racing championship. Motorsport is one of the few sports where men and women compete directly on equal footing. So most weekends, I'm the only woman on the grid, and I'm very proud to break barriers in such a male-dominated space. Today, I am racing in a series called IMSA, one of the top sports car series in North America, and I'm passionate about using my platform to empower women and minorities to chase their dreams and show that we do belong in motorsport and really in any space we choose to pursue.
Go girl, that is amazing. Which leads me to our next guest, Pranav. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Yeah, no, thank you for the intro. Yeah, my name is Pranav. I'm an Indian American from the Bay Area who was a former college football player, turned into working in sports media. So I started Amazing HQ at the end of my college football career as someone who dealt with a lot of isolation, a lot of not being able to see a lot of that representation. Um, and Amazing HQ really serves to be as the platform to champion the next generation of Asian sports stars. So what we try to do is identify a lot of these budding stars of the next generation from a young age and be able to create them into the heroes of the community in ways that, I wish I had when I was growing up. So we do that through a lot of different mediums, whether that's short form content on Instagram, TikTok. We do longer form docu-series style content on YouTube and hopefully with streaming platforms in the future. But we've had the opportunity to storytell and help tell the stories of some of our, community's biggest role models, from being able to partner with the NFL, with the NBA, and Team USA as well. Um, we also tackle it from the other side with the Amazing Foundation, where we hope to not just create these heroes through media, but also to tackle the systemic issues that belong in our community or that are currently in our community. Where why is there so little representation? What are some of the barriers there that we need to help overcome? And that's kind of what we do through the Amazing Foundation. So we try to put in those programs in place, be able to develop talents from a grassroots level. And one of our biggest events that we do from that side is called the Amazing All-Star Showcase, which for us is, if a lot of people know the McDonald's All-American game, we try to do that for the Asian community. So this May, we'll be bringing together the best 20 girls and boys, high school seniors, from basketball players from across North America into one gym to show that, it's not just one or two cases of success, but you can fill a whole gym of them. And we can inspire the next generation to show, oh, in 10 years, you can be like this. But, in really what we're trying to do is redefine what it means to be an Asian athlete, not just for society, but even within our own community, because I think we need that reassurance as well.
Thank you so much. I can imagine that with your work, you might be busier than maybe ever before. So thank you for your important coverage because we do know that representation plays such an important role for those of us who've been historically excluded. So, and our Nielsen research actually backs that up. Our data and measurement is really marking the impact that these trends can have. So let's get right into the numbers. In our recent Nielsen analysis, we found that AANHPI audiences spend a greater share of their TV time watching live sports. So 15% more time compared to audiences overall, in fact. And so, from your perspective, what do you think is driving this audience engagement and fueling Asian fan bases? And Pranav, I'll go back to you.
Yeah. I think, I can speak on behalf of a lot of people in the Asian community. I think we always knew that, the Asian American, the Asian Canadian community have always been some of the most passionate sports fans. Even when we didn't see that representation, you see how much we gravitate towards those sports stars. I think even within my own community, we saw how much people gravitated towards Kobe, the Mamba mentality. And it's like, obviously we know we were never going to be that 6'6", hyper athletic player that, that Kobe was, but we were able to channel that in other ways. And I think that passion has always been there. But now, as you're seeing more and more representation of of our people of our own heritage at that level, that's like when that passion even drives further. I think what's been awesome too is that a lot of the Asian immigration that has come to America now, because of the globalization of sports, they are getting introduced, like our parents or their parents have been introduced to sport in their motherlands, so it's not just when they're coming here, now it's like they have to discover the sport, which was probably the case, 20, 30 years ago. Now, that love of sports and love of these major sporting leagues, even in America, are coming with already a deeply rooted fan base from these Asian countries as they're immigrating here. And I think that's made a huge difference.
Absolutely. Samantha, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, I think you guys touched on it earlier, both of you, but I think a huge part of this growth is, like you said, representation. When you see someone who looks like you, who shares a similar background or cultural experience, it really creates this powerful instant connection. And I know I've personally felt that watching athletes like Chloe Kim, Naomi Osaka, like you mentioned, Cindy Lee. These women aren't just champions in their sport. They're confident, they're proud of their heritage, and incredibly authentic in how they show up in the world, which are exactly the qualities that I, and I'm sure many others, strive to have. So when I see them succeed, it reminds me that there's space for me too. And I think a lot of AANHPI feel that same sense of possibility. It's not just about the medals or the headlines. It's about seeing someone who really reflects your lived experience and feeling seen. When fans feel seen, they become so emotionally invested. Then representation turns passive viewing into active support. It really shifts the mindset from spectator to participant because, suddenly you're not just watching a game or a race. You start to see yourself in the story, and that story is being built on the world stage. I think there's also this really powerful generational shift happening, especially among second gen AANHPI, because many of us grew up in households that didn't always see sports as a viable career path.
Mm-hmm.
Typically we're encouraged towards like a path of business or medicine or tech. So now being able to watch AANHPI athletes really thrive on ESPN and the Olympics, on magazine covers, it's so incredibly validating. And I think we're using sports really as a way to reconnect with our identity and claim space in mainstream culture. It's really about the visibility, pride, and finally seeing ourselves represented, not just in the crowd, but on the podium.
I love that. And yeah, we did not miss that economics degree. So get you somebody who can do both, right? It's what I think I really appreciate, as someone trying to be an ally, identifying from a different community. But what I really love about the representation that's happening now, and you touched on it there, is people can show up authentically as themselves. They can show up with their culture. One of the things we highlight is, more than half of the community, according to the last census, is born in another country. But as you mentioned, there's also multi-gen folks who are here. And so where there might have been sort of that melting pot mentality in the past, people can still hold those really deep cultural connections and show up and celebrate that, and be competitive and be centered and, like you said, be on the podium or behind the scenes, whatever it takes. So I really love seeing that authenticity across the board for people who have maybe felt like they had to conform to something else in years past. And sports is a place where it all goes down. So you get to see that, like you said, on the world stage. So fantastic points. We're going to stick with the theme of representation a little bit more, because for me, that's where it's all at, right? And so one of those areas I think where we really saw this shine was with the World Series last year. And so, we talked about Shohei Ohtani, the LA Dodgers kind of taking the World Series by storm, and averaging over 15 million viewers. It was the highest viewed, most watched World Series since 2017. And Asian viewership in particular went up 146% compared to the prior year, according to Nielsen audience measurement. So that's a great case study. But I wonder what your thoughts are on how other sports leagues or associations can create similar momentum through, with their Asian talent or with their Asian fan base. And I'll go back to you, Samantha.
Yeah, I think, and Pranav touched on this earlier, but digital platforms, I think social media, streaming services, they've made sports so much more accessible, especially for emerging sports like racing.
Mm-hmm.
Fans don't just watch races, they get to follow like our training, our behind the scenes
Absolutely.
moments, our thoughts and our vulnerabilities. And I think a really great example of this is Drive to Survive, specifically for Formula One. That series was, in my opinion, a cultural reset for them. It didn't just introduce the sport to new audiences, it really changed the entire landscape of the F1 fan base, especially in the US. Just because giving that fans that exclusive, like behind the scenes look, the rivalries, the personalities, the pressure, it made the drivers so much more, or feel so much more human and more relatable. And I think that's truly the kind of content people connect with. That level of access just humanizes us, and that kind of emotional investment is what I think turns casual viewers into lifelong supporters.
Love that. And I think there was a Nielsen analysis a couple years ago that showed that actually viewing shows like that actually increased fandom for Formula One. So you're spot on there. Pranav, anything you would add?
Yeah, I think on the point with about Shohei Ohtani and about the World Series, I think like if you really look at it, Shohei Ohtani is probably the first Asian or Asian American face of a major American sporting league in probably our history amongst the four major sporting leagues, right? And I think yes, for now, this is like a once in a generation type of deal, but that it is a precedent to show what is possible for the future. I think in MLB, like that's going to be a trend that'll be continuing. Like whether that's, after Shohei's journey ends, it's not just him. There's already so many other stars. You're seeing
Yeah.
Giants with Jung Ho Lee, you're seeing so many other athletes like that, right? Kumar Rocker just, became the first Indian heritage player to win an MLB start just 4 days ago. So
Love
you're
it.
seeing more and more things like that in the MLB, and I think that trend will be rising. I think that's a little bit of an interesting case because baseball is actually a steadily growing sport in Asia versus in
Right.
America, actually somewhat of a dying sport. So I think there is somewhat of a momentum shift between different regions in that scenario. Um, but in regards to other sports, you're like, I think obviously what we've seen over the past 5 years of what I've built with Amazing HQ is each year you're seeing more and more representation in every sport, basically. And I think what is important is that, yes, we've always seen some levels of representation in all these sports in prior times, but oftentimes we never really heard those stories, right? So, like people don't know who Roman Gabriel was, but he was the first Asian NFL MVP back in, like 50 years ago, 40 years ago. But if that happened today, how big of a moment would that be? A Filipino American quarterback from the Los Angeles Rams being the NFL MVP. That would be something that would never end, but the talks about that. So I think today what makes the most difference is not just having that representation at the highest levels, but how do we if they really, embrace it, if they really identify with the heritage, how do we allow them to be, spokespeople for that? How do we allow them to truly be themselves and speak authentically to, this is my family. This is like why this is important to me. Just even like you see simple things nowadays, like, oh, like cooking with your family or cooking with your grandparents, and how much that resonates with people that like don't even necessarily care about sports, right? Where,
Hmm.
I think someone who's done an incredible job of that is Cam Bynum from the Minnesota Vikings. He's a Filipino American safety from the Minnesota Vikings. Oftentimes, the safety position is more of like an afterthought in terms of like the star-studded positions in football. But because he is so passionate about his Filipino heritage, and he's always, whether it's repping the flag or giving shout outs like on, Sunday Night Football, I think it's those moments that we have to authentically dive into and allow for more. Because without that, yes, you'll see the representation, but the representation is 10 times more amplified when the athletes themselves, are able to fully speak about it in a way that, they're able to touch the communities both here in America, but also in Asia.
Absolutely. And I think both of you touched on the theme of storytelling. And it's so interesting because, again, we looked at data recently in our January report that really zoomed in on the viewing habits of sports superfans. So they're watching more live sports content, than anyone else. But alongside that, in addition to the live events, was also sports commentary. So exactly what you're saying, the general audience, I think it was 2% of their time with sports commentary. For sports superfans in general, it was 7%. For Black sports superfans in particular, it was 9% of viewing time. So how we talk about these experiences, who's telling the story, again, how they honor their cultures and how that framing exists can have a really big impact even beyond the world of sport. Like again, tapping into, wow, I didn't know that about Filipino culture. And educating folks or exposing folks to these different paths can have so much power. But also just talking about their fantastic sports talent and achievements, right? So there really are so many opportunities to tap into the audience. But I wonder if we take this a different angle and talk about what the brand opportunity is as well here, right? Very little sports happens without a sponsor, especially in racing in particular.
Yeah.
Um, so Samantha, I wonder what your take is in particular around how you think brands can tap into the AANHPI consumers through sports and what they need to know to really be successful here beyond the World Series.
Yeah, like you mentioned, sponsorship is everything in motorsport, and I think this momentum specifically doesn't sustain itself. It really grows when brands and institutions invest intentionally in building inclusive pipelines, both on the field and behind the scenes. In racing, for example, we're starting to see more diversity-focused sponsorships, driver development programs, and support systems for underrepresented groups. It's slow progress, but it's progress, and that's what matters. I think as the world becomes more interconnected, so does sport, obviously. I think we're going to continue seeing global fan bases grow, not because of a single athlete or event, but because the foundation for long-term inclusion is finally being built. This is where I think brands have such a powerful role to play. Support goes so much further when it's sustained. So instead of one-off sponsorships, brands should really think about long-term partnerships that actually empower athletes, helping us tell our stories, fuel community impact, and increase visibility beyond race day. I've been really lucky to work with brands like BMW that don't just see me as a racer, but as a storyteller, like you mentioned, and change maker. They've supported my journey both on and off the track and helped me amplify the message I truly care about, that there's room for more women and minorities in motorsport. But above all, it has to feel authentic. The community
Absolutely.
can really tell when something's performative, for example, versus when a brand genuinely wants to uplift and invest in the culture. It's about aligning values and not just attaching a logo.
100%. And I think the biggest tell, as you mentioned, is when it's a one and done, right? I think the biggest giveaway is not just where you show up, but how often and who with, to your point. So very well said. Pranav, anything else you would add here about how to be successful even beyond the World Series, especially looking ahead? We do have these global events coming up, World Cup, Olympics 2028. What else do brands need to know?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the Asian viewing community, but also the Asian athlete community, I think the stories lend to be a lot more authentic, naturally, just because there's a lot less of like, oh, we have to figure out a way to how do we make someone who has great stats or great analytics, but maybe isn't necessarily a very it doesn't have a great story. How do you make that a cool story, which is might be the case for more of the general athlete audience when it comes to when it comes to most Asian athletes, oftentimes there is a lot of struggle that goes into their journey, no matter what sport they're in. There's a lot of hardship, there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of uniqueness, just because we're in a state where, yes, like a lot of these examples are, sometimes the first of this or the second to do this, things like that. So we're still in that case where it's like those stories are really, really impactful. And naturally they just lend to better authentic storytelling moments, which is something if a brand can tie themselves to will only, I mean, not only, but will inevitably benefit them, right? Um, I think, you're seeing this at at the grassroots and college level as well, where you're seeing brands start to tie in and really understand the value of these Asian stories. Like you just see at the college level this year, two of the biggest names in the sport on the college basketball side, on the guy side, is Xavier Lee, who
Hmm.
was a basketball player from Princeton University. Princeton University, you never think of basketball, right? But because they had a a star Korean Canadian, basketball player that lived a life that was so relatable to so many other Asian Americans and Asian Canadians. He blew up into one of the biggest stars of of the college basketball world. On the other side, we had Caitlin Chen, right, who
Hmm.
just won the national championship with UConn. And
But
she,
also, fun fact, did a term at Princeton.
yeah,
So
yeah,
now I think now they might start thinking.
yeah, yeah, a Princeton graduate as well, and then went on to UConn. And even though she was still like the third, fourth option at UConn, she was like still one of the biggest stars in the country because you know her story and just seeing what she's doing is like is being able to relate with her personality, relate with her story, relate with her journey. I think that's been so cool because like for me, it's been awesome too because I've been able to see and know these athletes from their high school ages when they were very little known names and Xavier had zero offers or had one offer at that time and then he ended up going to Princeton. So it's just seeing that progression and as brands tied to it, now you see Xavier going to Florida and signing what is estimated to be like a $3 million NIL contract. So things like that. It's like you wouldn't have expected to happen like years ago. Like that, those the opportunities didn't exist for like a Jeremy Lin or someone like that in the past.
Yeah, and I think what is really so exciting about this moment, like you said, is the ability to really not just tell those stories, but keep telling them and tell them so deeply and authentically. I'm so personally excited about, the team that the Valkyries are building, especially between their coach and Caitlin and all this talent. There's going to be a lot more to dive into there, so I'm really excited to see how that continues to develop. But great points. Let me transition to our next question here for you. Um, Going back to our diverse intelligence series report, we outlined Nielsen data that really shows the strong connection among Asian audiences and increase in interest among US audiences. So we talked about some of that cultural exchange that's going on with such a deep ties to home countries. And cricket, for example, India's most popular sport, is on the rise in the US with 13% of adults identifying now as fans. And so it's also set to be a featured sport in the upcoming Olympics in Los Angeles. And so, with all of this exchange that's happening between Asian cultures and the US, how can brands leverage both regions' sports fans? You tapped into a little bit about this already, but Pranav, I wonder if you can pick it up there and talk about how else folks should consider serving both fan bases.
Yeah, I think the synergy is a lot more like one to one when you think of like something like the MLB, where the majority of the Asian heritage, like the Asian heritage players are actually from Asia versus Asian American. And I think that's a lot easier where it's like, yes, like we'll still see a lot, we still like identify the representation here. But in Asia, like that's like where these people were already stars and they were already household names and be able to leverage those brands make a lot of sense. Same thing, somewhat in the NBA too. Like you see like players like, like Rui Hachimura, Yuto Watanabe, Yuki Kawamura, right? Like they're all from Japan and they have huge fan bases there. I think, obviously as you go into other sports like football, a lot of the Asian heritage presence in the league is all Asian American, right? So it's how do we, yeah, like how do you know, how do we create like as those athletes build into those truly authentic storytellers that they are, like a Ken Bynum or whoever that is, how can, a brand overseas, like whether that's like a Jollibee or whatever it might be able to attract, tie in their brand to that. I think once that like that identity and kind of storytelling within themselves is built up, I think then it will feel less forced. But I do think like you are seeing it a lot more now. Um, and I think, yeah, like with cricket, that's like a huge thing. I think obviously a lot of people who aren't of like, South A or aren't of South Asian heritage or aren't from like a country that was colonized by England in the past don't know so much about cricket, but it is like one of the biggest sports in the world. And the IPL, I think, has the highest like contract payout like in any sporting league in the world. So them coming to America is huge, especially as you see the rise of like Indian American demographic here in America, and obviously the buying power as well of the Indian American demographic. So I think like with something like the MLC, the Major League Cricket in the US, like it is very easy where it's like a lot of the viewership is going to be both the Indian community, in India, but also like the South Asian community out here in America. Um, so I think it comes with one, like how much is that familiarity of these brands, within these first, second generation people here. And then for the ones that who don't know, like some of these brands in Asia, how do they then naturally, authentically start seeding themselves here? Whether that's through working with some of these heritage players and and then kind of growing from there. But I think you're definitely seeing more and more of that now.
Definitely. And Samantha, you talked about the global phenom that is Formula One, but I wonder what your take is about, other opportunities that lie ahead when it comes to growing fan loyalty in motorsport or serving, sort of audiences across Asia and across the US or Canada.
Hmm. Just to piggyback off of Pranav's answer, I think, what we're seeing now isn't just the rise of emerging sports in the US, but it's really this rise of cross-cultural storytelling through
Mm-hmm.
sport. For brands, I think the key is to stop thinking in silos, for lack of a better word. Many fans, especially like Gen Z fans, are global citizens. They follow Formula One drivers, cricketers in India, and
Mm-hmm.
content creators in Korea, like all on the same feed. Their interests aren't limited by geography, and brands really need to reflect that in how they show up. Because when they take the time to highlight both the roots of these sports and how they're evolving in the US, it really invites more people into the experience. It's not just about watching the game, it's about understanding the history, the passion, and the community behind it. You mentioned the 2028 Olympics in LA. I think that's going to be a massive platform for this kind of like cultural exchange. And it's not just about the sport itself, it's like the food, the
Yeah.
music, the traditions, the energy that the fans bring. That's what makes it exciting. And kind of similar but related, we're already seeing this happen in pop culture. Like, look at K-pop, for
Oh my
example.
gosh, absolutely.
Groups like Blackpink, New Jeans, now even Japanese acts like XG or digital performers like Hatsune Miku. They're headlining festivals like Coachella and Lollapalooza here in the States. That kind of cultural influence has opened the door for fans to explore new languages, new identities, and sports, I think, are starting to follow that same trajectory. It really sparks curiosity. I think it makes people want to learn more about where these athletes come from, what their stories are, and what traditions truly shape them. I experienced this firsthand when I went to 88 Rising, if you know that brand, Head in the Clouds Festival. It wasn't just about the music, which were all by AANHPI artists. It was a celebration of identity. They gave a platform to not only the artists, but to the cultural cuisines that these artists grew up on, from like ramen to Hainan chicken rice to banh mi
Love.
and boba. Like it just made the whole experience feel so much more authentic and rooted in something meaningful. even my own work with BMW, I've had the opportunity to share stories about my culture, whether it's like celebrating Lunar New Year or honoring the Mid Autumn Festival. And it's been so rewarding to see fans respond with genuine interest. And these kinds of moments, I think, connect people in a deeper way and show that sports, like music, are truly universal languages.
Oh, that's so well put. Oh my gosh. I think that just seeing the acknowledgement, again, when you come to the holidays and traditions in I think the last few years, the uptick in media coverage or going into a store and seeing a greeting card that maybe is around a certain festival, it's just moving in the right direction. But like you said, there's a fine line between sort of like exploitating or actually celebrating. And I love seeing the brands doing the work to really walk alongside people from those communities and cultures who can do it right. So there's so many untapped opportunities. Thank you so much for sharing your opinions there. I know you're both very busy, so I'll go to the last question. And again, focusing on how advertisers and media owners kind of tap into sports and the growing fan bases across the Asian community. When you look at digital platforms, as you mentioned, like sports podcasts, as they look to increase investment, our data also shows that the AANHPI monthly listeners to sports podcasts increased 28%. And so, as our data guides us to be more intentional in setting out our strategies on how to reach and connect with folks, what else do you think that advertisers should keep in mind about the community and the best ways to really connect with them?
Who's tackling it first?
Oh, I will go back to Samantha. Sorry about that.
All good, all good. I will go first. So I wouldn't consider myself an expert in media consumption trends, but I could definitely speak from experience as both a creator and someone who's grown up in this community. And I think the biggest thing advertisers and media owners need to understand is that we are not a monolith. The AANHPI community is made up of so many different cultures, languages, and experience. And Pranav touched on this earlier, but nuance is key. The
Yeah.
more specific and culturally aware a campaign is, the more it resonates, simply put. Digital first is also absolutely the way forward, especially for reaching younger fans. Platforms like podcasts, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, if it stays, are where AA and HPI audiences are really discovering new athletes and new sports. I've seen firsthand how short form content, BTS, and even honest reflections have brought people deeper into my world as an Asian female race car driver. And lastly, and most importantly, representation shouldn't only exist on camera. Include us in the creative direction, in the campaign strategy, and in the decision making rooms, because that's where real change happens. And when we're part of shaping the story from the inside out, the result is always more authentic and more impactful.
Preach, Samantha. Okay. Pranav, what you got for us?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it from like the media side. I think what's been really cool just seeing the growth of Amazing HQ and why the growth has been possible has been due a lot to kind of how algorithms of social media have changed to what Samantha had mentioned is like the the nicheification, of this and allowing to see such specific content in a way that was never possible before. Like, as I'm scrolling through my feed, I'm seeing things that I never even like have spoken about or even spoken with my family about, but it's like those intrinsic things that, oh, like only like people who grew up in the same like specific heritage or whatever like would understand. And I think those are things that like the today's algorithms, obviously there are bad things about that too, but that has allowed for this content to reach the right people. And I think that's like really important, is that um, people always wanted this content, but there was never like a vehicle for that to really get to them in a way that was efficient, right? And now there finally is. Um, and I'd say, with so yeah, like speaking to the media owners, like I think when in the sports world, when they think of reaching the Asian audience, a lot of times, obviously in some sports it's a lot more obvious, but in other sports, you're like, oh, like there aren't even many Asian people in this sport. Why would we want to even reach this audience? Like they're probably not watching it. But that in reality, that's just like not the truth for most sports. In some sports, yes, like that could be the case. But for the majority of like consumer-driven sports in America and Canada and across the world, like the Asian population, no matter how small it is in these different locations, are still oftentimes the most passionate. I'm sure, you guys can provide the statistical backing to kind of back that up. Um, but in addition with that, um, and I think I wouldn't know, maybe more so than like other communities, when we see representation of, Asian athletes in sports, that resounds so much bigger than sports to so many people. And I think the really cool thing about our fan base at Amazing HQ is a lot of them don't even care about sports. Like for me, like I don't know if I want to out myself, but I don't even like watch, like I'm not watching the NBA playoffs. I'm not watching all these things. I haven't like followed sports since intensely since high school. But because of seeing this representation of these Asian athletes, that is what I gravitate towards, and I watch them specifically, right? Because seeing that is like what I care about now. Um, in the same way that a lot of other people think that, whether it's like, oh, the only reason I would watch sports is because I'm seeing people look like me, or I'm seeing someone that, is eating the same food as me or had the same upbringing as me. And I think that is the biggest thing because today, and for the better or worse, like the majority of our role models in our society are created through sports, or a lot of them at least. So it's like whether your kid wants to be a basketball player, football player, or something that is not anything related to that, them seeing that representation in a non-traditional field is a huge thing. And so being able to understand that, you know, storytelling around these athletes is going to reach such a larger audience than just that sporting audience is a huge thing. Um, but but also more than that is so the last thing I wanted to touch upon, and it comes to the reason why I started Amazing HQ. It's like, who are the people making the decisions of what stories are being told?
Mm.
And because my journey and kind of like my career was like, oh, I went to like journalism school. I was taught, oh, you have to work your way up the ladder. You probably have to go through to like Nebraska to college and like work in the 400th level market or something, and then work your way up. And I was like, eventually, I was like, oh, hopefully, I become a strong enough, reporter that I can carve out my own niche eventually, as an Asian American sports reporter or something. But then I realized, like, if I just waited for that, would a niche like that even be created? Because who are the ones deciding which stories are being told? And you realize, like, if we ourselves are not the ones in the decision-making power of like what stories are being told, oftentimes those stories will never be told, not because like there's bad people in charge, but more so because oftentimes like there is a lack of knowledge, lack of like understanding of like, oh, this is like oh, he might be the 12th player on the bench, but this is like the first time we've ever seen something like this happen. That story is an important thing to tell. So I think not only having more of us in those media decision-making power seats, but also broadening the understanding and broadening the education to everyone else in all the other communities to allow them to understand why these stories are important, not just for the Asian community, but whether that's a story that's specific to the Latino community or the indigenous community, something like that. It is equally as important in those respective fields as well. But I think that's a huge thing.
I love how you both really zoomed in on not just the talent that's out front in performing as an athlete, but certainly the power of decision makers behind the scenes across the media industry, behind the sports industry, really matter to make sure that we continue to see this talent elevated and celebrated across AANHPI. And like you said, all the historically excluded communities that we are now taking center stage. I want to thank you, Samantha and Pranav, so much for joining us today. Thank you, Samantha. We appreciate you letting us behind the scenes into motorsport world.
Thank you for having me.
Pranav, keep telling those great stories. Thank you again for joining us.
Appreciate you for having us.
All right. And for everyone else, thank you for your time. You can go to nielsen.com/insights to download our latest report.